Representative Chris Corey of Yakima, Assistant Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee and Assistant Floor Leader, and Representative Drew McEwen of Union, Assistant Ranking Member on the Appropriations Committee, Assistant Floor Leader, and Ranking Member on the Commerce and Gaming Committee. With that, I will hand it over to our budget lead, Representative Drew Stokesbury.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Like John said, I'm State Representative Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District in Auburn, and I'm standing virtually, of course, in the middle of the Carbon River in the heart of the 31st District. Here in the legislature, I am the House Republicans' ranking member on the Appropriations Committee. So I am our lead on virtually all things related to the budget. I apologize if you heard that truck. Auburn is also home to a lot of construction activity these days. Presenting to you today and joining me are a few of my assistant ranking members on the committee, and I'll turn it over to them in a minute to talk about some more specific issues. But first, I wanted to briefly mention the outline that our budget proposal is taking. You know, it's no secret that this past year has been extremely challenging. It's been unprecedented in many ways, and it's affected all of our lives in ways we couldn't have imagined at this point in time 1 year ago. And our state budget has not been immune to those unprecedented challenges. When we left town at the end of last session, we had a modest budget surplus, and in June we had a revenue forecast that suddenly showed us with a $8+ billion budget deficit. Since then, though, the revenue picture has stabilized, and while there are certainly parts of the economy and many families that are still struggling, in the aggregate, tax revenues have rebounded, and the budget situation is stabilized. Depending on what you count for revenue assumptions and caseload maintenance level spending changes, we are looking at a very, very modest budget deficit as things stand, or potentially a slight surplus. But the legislature has solved much more complicated budget challenges than what exists before us today. And the proposal that we are presenting shows a path forward to fund a lot, if not all, of the state's critical and emerging needs and fund them as core priorities in the budget. And we can do it, as we show, without raising taxes on anybody or anything, and without cutting any critical services that people depend on. All told, this budget spends about $6.6 billion between the rainy day fund and the new general fund. While we do use the rainy day fund, it is only used to pay for one-time COVID-related expenses, so it doesn't create an unsustainable bow wave that we'll need to solve in the future. And we can afford to spend additional money because we've also identified $6.2 billion in near general fund savings. And the majority of these savings are things that shouldn't be controversial. It is using things like drawing down additional federal funds or deploying federal funds in a more creative way that frees up state funds, relying on dedicated accounts that have capacity to fund services that should have been paid for out of those accounts all along. It assumes savings that were already generated by agencies over the summer as they held positions vacant or had to delay expanding or implementing new programs. But it also identifies some additional savings areas that we think represent better policies and also better and more responsible uses of state tax dollars. Things like if a WISP study showed that a program has a zero cost benefit ratio or has a 0% chance of achieving positive outcomes, the legislature should revisit those programs. They might have been well-intentioned in their time, but when we have evidence that shows that it is simply spending money without achieving results, we should have the humility to revisit those decisions and chart a better path forward. And when you take all of these things together, we're able to fund some enormous programs that the state desperately needs, things that have failed to be funded for the 6 or 7 years I've served in the legislature. Things like the Working Families Tax Credit. It's existed in law for the last 12 years and never once been funded. Things like additional funding for foundational public health. Our budget proposal would provide more funding to local public health jurisdictions than the governor's budget would, and we don't raise taxes on health insurance plans to do it. We fully fund the Department of Natural Resources Forest Health Management Plan, and we don't raise taxes on property and casualty insurance plans to do it. We raise provider rates for Medicaid providers in primary care and behavioral health fields, which is an item that the governor vetoed last year and didn't propose funding again in his new budget. So I'm going to turn it over to my assistant ranking members and my colleagues in a minute. But I guess the bottom line is, we hear a lot of talk and rhetoric about helping working families, but working families deserve more than rhetoric. They deserve real solutions, and that's what this budget provides. This is a budget that will help the people of Washington, not special interests or government agencies or bureaucracies, but the